Okay, so thanks to everyone who can join today. We weren't sure how what size group we'd have today, considering we had a few folks that had some scheduling conflicts. So it's great to see folks that could join us today. So Mark and I have some things to go over today. We'll get into things, and then hopefully have some good time for a Q&A for any things that might pop up at the end. So I guess with that, we'll just jump right in and see where we go with things. So. Just off the bat, because I think pretty much everybody here, and I can't see the fullest of attendees now, is sharing full screen, but I'm assuming most of you, if all, have met us before or know us. Just in case you haven't, though, my name's Al. I serve as the Web Operations Manager at CALS IT, and of course, Mark is there as well. Mark Millard is our web service developer who actually does all the heavy lifting and gets all the good work done. So with that, I guess we'll jump into a couple of things and talk about some of the updates we have today. So today's focus, we're going to have a couple different topics. We've got one to go over some just, of course, general service news and updates, things we're working on. We have some showcase pieces to talk about from a design perspective, which will be nice. I think just from just a good idea for sort of where things are going and what we're working towards. We're going to have some things to cover with Gutenberg, some updates to not a whole lot of the editor this current edition, but some good tips and updates and things in general. And then, of course, a little bit of a demo of how to use Gravity Forms for those that haven't dove into using Gravity Forms before. We think that we've looked at current usage of it and see that there's actually quite a few folks that have not yet had a chance to maybe leverage that potentially in their particular use case. So, and of course, some time and then for Q&A. So, with that, I guess I'll jump into some news and updates here real quick. And then Mark, I'll let Mark you jump in and take over as well anytime. I have a couple things to cover. Off the bat, what we're doing right now is we are working on in the background. We're working towards our updated theme. This has sort of been in the sort of in the running for a little while now, but it's been something we've been able to pick back up and really run with. And as we've iterated through a lot of different design elements and things that we're trying to do with it, we wanted to give kind of a brief, quick overview of like sort of where we've come from and where we're going with things, and give you a sense of what we're trying to do. And I think that to do that here, I'm going to give you kind of a just sort of exit out of the actual slideshow for a moment. I want to give you a sort of a quick background as to where we've come from here. And some of this is a little bit of a blast from the past, and those who have seen this before are going to recognize these. But of course, we have sites from the CALS site that go from the early 2000s up to now and where things are at. So some of this predates me. So I don't know where some of this is, but you can just definitely tell based on the way the web has progressed, how these things have changed over time. So seeing this, early evolution of where we're going with the CALS websites and themes is that overarching wise, we're going to go from where we've been before to kind of something that's a lot more flexible and accommodating to all the different use cases we've run into over the years. I think early on, this old design you see here was just sort of done one-off as the main college site, and that was kind of about it. And I think at least back in that period, there was a lot of folks that were sort of doing their own things, just as that was kind of the main way you had an opportunity to do that. Moving on through things, we got into sort of the kind of 2010s, early 2010s area, and there was this version of the CALS website, which had a little bit more of a few elements to it. Again, the origination of this even predates me a little bit, and then as time moved on, this was the first WordPress incarnation. So this became sort of the first time that there was at least some sort of content management system that all of you now tend to use day in, day out. Actually applied here. One of the things that we kind of moved on to as we moved through things was, I think this was the first design incarnation I got to work on, and it was just sort of, I think, around the 2013 timeframe, and was starting to try to encompass a lot of the really amazing work of photography that was already being done, not by me, but by a lot of the folks downstairs in external relations and other areas of the college. So it started to become a greater focus to highlight, what the college was doing. And this is actually around the time that our Dean Kate had started, believe it or not. So that's part of that design there. We've then moved into what we have today, at least for the time being, which is the theme that was produced and put out in 2015. This theme, was kind of devised around the idea of, again, showcasing more of that photography work, but doing something that was a little bit more, both in keeping with what obviously the college was trying to do and have some of the features that folks had been requesting, but also, it sort of reflected the change in design that happened at the central campus level too, with StudyView, and having all of those elements included within that. So this was also had a couple of fantastic elements in the background, which brought it forward things like more flexible design options, brought forward our first version of sort of our own page builder. So you could do things like 2-column layouts, things like that. And obviously sort of took on some of the newer design elements that were just sort of common trends for the web, if you would, if you will. So more vertical page layouts, things that scroll a lot more space, that sort of thing. So that kind of brings us up to today. And the thing that we wanted to kind of give people a sneak peek at and things that we're trying to drive towards is where we're going with things. So first and foremost, there's a lot of what you'll see in what we're working towards is going to be very reflective and evolutionary from what we've had in the current theme that everyone's working with today. And it's going to be something that will be continue to evolve and adjust as time goes on. Part of which because the stuff never sits still. We're working in a space that this stuff is always changing, and design trends are always changing, and what campus does centrally from a brand perspective is generally going to change now and then. So there's a lot of those sort of things and elements that we're going to be bringing forward. The bigger difference, though, and the thing that I want to kind of bring and zoom out here a little bit for you here, is that this theme is not trying to impose a singular look and feel as much as the previous themes have. Where everyone has to have a carousel and everyone has to have a hero banner image, and everyone has to have these pieces on it. And that while to some degree we're going to still offer, and I would call guide folks on having something like that if they can support it, it's less of a requirement. And that comes to the benefit for a number of reasons. Number one is not every unit is intending to have a sort of marketing-esque outbound looking website in that same way. Not everyone has the same goal, not everyone has the same audience. And we want to reflect that in what we're doing here. So a lot of what has been part of the design and the theming is evolving in terms of the shapes of elements on the screen, the sizing of text, right? Things like that, the logo, the crest, how that is all applied, all that'll be there for you and styled for you to make things look a lot nicer. But the actual page design changes radically. For those that have used the current theme, you'll notice that there's lots of the upper part of the site that you have now that kind of has to look a certain way, and you have to apply certain content there to make it look a certain way. This is shrinking dramatically in the new design. It's going to be encompassing things that are a lot less prescriptive, except for things up in the navigation bar. And then everything below, sort of in this purple area, this page content area, whether you're looking at something on the left or something on the right, is going to be something that you can change and adjust over time. And the elements that you have here, whether you do have still a carousel, or you have a hero banner image, or you have different types of content, is going to be up to you as the site owner and the content producer. And what we're going to do to help you do that is not only support you from a standpoint of helping with any questions and answers you may have, but also trying to come forward with a lot of these design patterns that we've had a chance to show you in previous meetings. And these patterns and elements will make things a lot easier to decide when you do need a carousel, how to put one on the page simply and easily, and one that still supplies you with a good set of imagery to start from. So these are the sort of things that we're working towards. And there's going to be, this is sort of just two quick elements, you can see just these two. There's a little bit of a header design to these. There's going to be what we're going to be calling basically overall global theme styles that'll be a part of the theme. So you can choose a few different flavors of sort of the same theme as you move. So as you work with your site, you can decide how some of these elements might look and play. And so here's an example of one that maybe doesn't encompass something that's got an hero image at the top. So these are elements and things we're still working on. What you've seen today in these screenshots here are purely mock-ups, but we do have some of the stuff actually currently working in our own prototypes right now. So we're going to be working towards that and eventually have this available for folks to be able to leverage and use. So just want to give a little bit of a sneak peek to that and how that works. And with that, I guess that's pretty much all I have there. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the next topic items? All right, Mark, do you want to take over screen sharing potentially? Would that make it easier for you, or?
Yeah, sure. Why don't I do that while you maybe talk about the next item there? Okay.
All right, excellent. So while Mark's doing that, one of the things that I had on the list there next after this too as well was a little bit of how we're doing with our current block and page editor updates. Right now we are working towards those block patterns, and those are going to be ongoing. And we have a couple of those that are going to be sort of in development now. We're working on right now with things for faculty and staff, directory listings, and a couple of other elements that kind of pertain to that. So more of those I would imagine will be getting out in the next coming weeks, I would say, and just have something that's available for folks to continue to leverage on the site. Under infrastructure, we do have another big thing that we're doing behind the scenes, and this is something that doesn't really affect anybody too dramatically, but it will have a little bit of a side benefit for those that have multiple websites, which is that we're going to be consolidating our 2 individual multi-sites that we currently manage behind the scenes here into one. What does that really mean to you? Well, it doesn't change anything from your site. It doesn't change your URL. It doesn't change anything about how you log in. But if you do happen to have multiple websites and you've had a couple that potentially spanned between a lab and maybe anything at the administrative level, you've had to log in separately at each. And now this will be under one, this will be shared so that when you are logged into the WordPress dashboard, there'll be an opportunity to look up in the upper left-hand side, and under your My Sites menu, there'll be a complete list of the sites that you actually manage. So that'll be a little bit more beneficial, I think, to that regard. Otherwise, it's mostly a change for Markline. It helps us make sure that we keep on top of things with security patches, management, things like that. And then, yeah, Mark, did you want to talk about the plugin security audit?
Yeah. So speaking of security stuff, so as part of a process that we've been doing with plugins and in the way we sort of manage the plugins, a change there that'll make us a lot more efficient in terms of updating and migrating. We are also taking the time to go through all the list of plugins, because we've got a bit over 200 plugins. And so as we've been doing that, we've been going through and just sort of verifying, because a lot of them we have our own custom plugins that we've written, but a lot of them are third party. So we've been taking the time to check and verify, make sure a plugin is still being actively managed or migrated. If it's not, we're marking those, and we're going to come back around and start a process of, in some cases, in a lot of cases, we might have a plugin, a couple of plugins that serve the same function. And in some of these cases, one has sort of been abandoned or not being updated as much as we'd like. And so we're sort of working through a process to target those. And we may be reaching out to some of you that have a plugin that isn't being updated, or we have some concerns about, and help you kind of move over to a corollary plugin that'll still allow you to do the same thing that you need to do, but with a plugin that's being updated more frequently or being kept on top of. So we just wanted to mention that. That'll kind of be ongoing through the year. But if we reach out to you, that's what that is about. So yeah, so that takes care of infrastructure. And then just kind of reminder that our next webinar we've scheduled will be for June 23rd from 1 to 2, but don't worry, I'll send that date out in our next newsletter this month and the next one after that. So, but just kind of a little bit of a heads up on the next training. So, all right. So with that, are there any questions about any of the updates before I move on? All right. So I'm just going to take a few minutes here and talk about some Gutenberg block editor updates and some tips. So we had a pretty, what Al and I thought was a pretty exciting update to the editor that we wanted to share for those of you that have started working in Gutenberg. And then I'm just going to cover, so we've kind of identified a list of, there's that tricky scroll slide change that happens too. There's a list of topics here that we've kind of compiled from questions that we're getting from folks around CALS as we help and support them. And so, kind of the adage that usually if one person has the question, there's a number of others that have the same question. So we've kind of compiled a list of these common questions, and we're just going to cover some of the tips that kind of make your life easier as you're digging into Gutenberg and learning the editor. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes to cover these. The first thing I want to point out is a note about Gutenberg ramp plugin. And so I have a slide here just to highlight this. So if you haven't yet started working Gutenberg, but you would like to, there's an important point here with this Gutenberg ramp plugin. So So if you go into your website, and this is on a per website basis, because we do have this plugin installed. I think I looked before this, it's on about 190 or so sites. So you may have a site, if you have multiple sites, you might have one that doesn't have it and one that does. But if you're still seeing, if you go into the site and go into your page editing mode and still see the old editor, then that's an indication that you have Gutenberg ramp plugin on, which basically what that plugin does is keeps the new Gutenberg block editor from being available, basically, right? It sort of holds you back from the new update. So the point here is, if you would like to start using Gutenberg block editor and you go in and don't see it, because it is the new default, but if you don't see it, that's a good indication you have the ramp plugin on. And all you need to do is email us at web support and we can go shut that off for you. And then you'll be able to access the Gutenberg block editor. So just wanted to make, because we've had some folks emailing us confused, like, why am I not seeing the Gutenberg block editor? So just wanted to point that out. And then that's Al's slide. Okay, so let's jump into my demo here. Let me close that. So a couple things here. The first I wanted to show how kind of a note, and Al and I've shown this quite a bit in some of the previous demos, but we've still had some folks a little bit confused about how to move between the ACE editor, if you're using the ACE editor, and Gutenberg, if you want to start migrating over. So if you're in a page, and remember, this is on a page per page basis that you can start this migration if you want to migrate from the advanced content editor over to Gutenberg. But if you scroll down on your page, at the bottom, you should have an advanced formatting tab. In fact, if you're using Gutenberg, it would look like this, right? So there's two options for page editor. One is the normal WordPress editor, which is would be the Gutenberg editor. And right now I have that selected and I've got content there. But if I select the advanced content editor, so if your page is already using that, that's the setting you would have. And then you would see all of the content that you have in the ACE editor. So the idea is here, because of the content for Gutenberg editor and ACE editor are essentially stored in different spaces, you can keep the content of both. So you could start trying, so let's say I'm gonna just show you here. So I have the ACE content editor, which I'm gonna save. And if I load that page, it'll show me, it will use the ACE content editor content, which this is all I have on that page, right? So now if you wanted to start experimenting on that page with Gutenberg block editor, all you have to do is, again, switch over. Now I already have a bunch of stuff here, but then you would have access to the block editor and you could start sort of experimenting. And then if you update that, it's now going to, because that's the active editor in that page, it's going to save that as the active content. So if I go back to that page and reload, now I've got all of that content. So sort of, you can see it's a non-destructive kind of, so you can go to a page, might be some, in some way, if it's a very sophisticated page or important page, might be still good to make a copy and experiment over there. But once you're ready to really start transitioning, that would be a way that you could do that. So that's the differences between, getting back and forth between the two editors within a page. Okay. Now I should also preface, if you weren't using the ACE editor and you were just using I guess what we would call the classic WordPress editor, all of that content, the first time you open it in Gutenberg block editor, it's just going to show up right in a classic block within Gutenberg, and you're basically off and running. So this would be only if your site page used the ACE or advanced content editor. So not to sort of confuse you, but there's a few different pathways in terms of that migration. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the views that I think have confused people with the new block editor. So by default, it kind of goes into this full page, full screen mode is what they call it, right? So you kind of lose the ubiquitous WordPress admin, and I think that's thrown some people off. So to get back to admin, all you have to do actually is click the W up here, and a lot of you figured that out. But if you prefer to see that all the time, you can go up into the options menu, and you can toggle out of full screen mode, which again is the default, and it'll bring back your WordPress admin menu bar. Folks have just kind of mentioned they've been a little disoriented, feeling like it kind of pulls them out of WordPress. So that's how you could get that back if you want. So that's one little trick. One other thing I want to show is maybe for our advanced users that we're used to the visual or code tab in the classic editor. You can still see the code view. Again, it's in the options. Oops. It's in the options menu. You'll see here there's a lot of useful stuff in this options menu. And one again is the editor, visual editor or code editor. If I click the code editor, it then shows me the underlying HTML behind. Again, this is more, for some of the advanced users, but sometimes they might have a need to want to pull something out or see what it's actually doing. But that's how you can jump into the code editor, and then there's a button to exit back out of the code editor and go back into visual mode. All right. Again, if you have any questions, just raise your hand or turn on your mic, and feel free to ask it. Let's see. Now I've got a few things with working with blocks, and one of the most exciting things I want to mention is well, it's called the list view, which we've mentioned before, which is super helpful in seeing all of the blocks on your pages and how they're laid out and how they're organized or embedded within each other. All right, but one really cool thing they've added in one of the WordPress updates is now, which is something Al and I really wanted, and they did it really fast, so that was cool. Is you can actually now move them around. It has a drag and drop, so you can you'll see here, here's an example, right? I've got this 3-column element, and I've got the B, the person, and the graduation. But okay, let's say I want the B in 3rd position. Now we can use the list view to move things basically anywhere you want. So I think that's going to be, because sometimes it was a little tricky, using the drag mode on the menu here to kind of move things, especially if you're moving something at the top of the page or down. So I think it just already I've been using it. I've really found it super useful. Again, you can also, there's a submenu here on any of the elements that you select, where you can move to or duplicate. So you can also insert before or after if you want to insert a block before or after, which is actually the next thing I want to talk about is different ways to insert block. Because sometimes, I don't know, it's getting better, but I think they've maybe fixed the bug. I don't know. I used to sometimes have difficulty getting the plus insert, right? If I want to insert a block here, right? That's one way you can insert. Sometimes I would have issues when I'm hovering over there and it just would not show up. It was kind of frustrating. I could never figure out, but it seems like it's quite a bit better now. Anyway, one thing you can do now again is select the object that you want, and then you can use the insert here. So that's kind of just another quick way to insert before or after, move things around. So I feel like they're really making some really nice progress on the block editor and how you're using it, how I'm using it at least. It's been really nice. Let's see, what else did I want to cover? So I talked about duplicating, moving, inserting. So I think the last thing I just wanted to mention too, that I think has confused folks a little bit, is the difference between the page and the block attributes. And so the important thing here is this is right. This allows you to get a lot of the style attributes and formatting attributes for a block, any given block. So the important point though, it's important to know what you're selected. So that's right. That's the first important thing, because that's going to show you the block attributes for the element or the block that you have selected. Notice how that changes as I click from the image to the heading to the paragraph, and then even out to the block, the subcolumn itself, right? You'll notice these block attributes change. So that's one important point that I think folks have been a little confused about. But then the other two is there's page attributes, right? So these are you click on page tab, and then these are the attributes for the page itself, kind of like you've had before. And then you'll still find all of the similar page attributes that you had with the prior editor, such as the permalink. So what is the actual URL to the page? Again, an important option we had in our theme is hiding the sub navigation. So if you don't want the sub nav shown on a page, you can select that there. So any number of important page attributes. So and then again, revisions, if you want to look back to revisions, things like that. So we just want to call out the difference in kind of between how to get at those attributes for pages and blocks. So I think that's kind of the tips I wanted to cover for the block editor. Happy to take any questions that folks might have.
So Mark, I'll just mention too, because Sue had a quick question. Please. I think hers is independent of what some others have encountered, but I want to mention it just in case anyone else does encounter this. This is good to know. I think Sue's in particular, we're going to want to take a look at and I think specifically consider what might be going with her user. But she was seeing an issue where she couldn't see the Gutenberg editor. And I think in that regard, if anyone else does encounter this, where you've come in, you're set up to use it, but like the editor options aren't there, or you don't get that normal versus advanced content editor selection at the bottom, any of those sort of things you encounter, let us know. Those would be things to take a look at. I do believe, at least in the case with Sue's I've looked into, it's something specific with permissions and her user there. So we'll definitely, I've set up a time already. And so we will definitely take a look at that and get that addressed, but this is a good time to highlight that sort of thing in case anyone else has encountered something similar.
Any other questions? Yeah, I can't realize that I didn't have the chat open over here.
That's okay. It's kind of hard to. Oh, I see. There's one other one. Could you talk a little about full screen and widescreen? I have constant problems with widescreen being too small, but full screen puts content off the page. Is there a happy medium? So that's a great one. Yeah. So there's currently 3 supported widths right now for content groupings. Right. There's the, I guess, middle or centered, which is kind of the default, right? Which kind of meets the normal max width of about 950 or so, I think, pixels wide, give or take. There's wide, yeah, Mark's highlight there.
There's sort of an example, yeah.
Right, yeah, wide, and then there's full. So like if he changes, like for example, Mark, if you take the cover block, if like you change the cover block from, let's say, full to just wide, for example, that might be a good one to show. Is the idea being is that the wide one is kind of another sort of design selection we went back and forth on in terms of how wide that would be, and that ends up being about, it's percentage based. That one's a little bit more around 75% width of the total page, and each of these again are done at certain percentage intervals and breakpoints, of course, to make sure that mobile responsive still works with each of these, but that's always one we're wrestling with. And then full goes off the page. Do you have, I wonder if there's a couple of, is there an element in particular where there might be one that's for full screen it's going off the page, so to speak? I wonder if there's a good example for us to maybe look at there. Wide, what full should do is just go edge to edge. It shouldn't necessarily run off the page. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So here's like example of.
I asked this question. The problem that I have it most common is like when on the screen you're showing right now, you have like the 3 headers. So you have like 3 different like pictures and text box. When it's like presented there, it's like very narrow and like squished in the middle of the page. And there's just a lot of room on like the left and the right side. Like it's almost like half the page is dedicated just for the borders. But when I put things like that into full screen, it like cuts off. There's not like a clean white border around it.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's great to highlight. That's one we should fix. That is not intentional if it's cutting things off in that way. We should take a look at that. You're talking about with the sort of that 3-column area that Mark has down there, for example. Is that
It's like
sort of
here.
what the element there you're talking about?
Yes, but I've run into it with kind of like any kind of column thing that I do. It's
Got
not
it.
like
Yeah.
a equally spaced.
I see. Okay. No,
Okay.
that's great. Okay.
That's good to know.
Let me take a look at that. I'm going to pull that up in the background too and see if that's an easy one that we can address and highlight, though. That'd be great to do. Each one of these elements, especially, you know, there's the thing that we've been struggling with from time to time has just been the number of permutations that you can apply some of these elements within, and how to make sure that each of those works as it should. I think the greater flexibility editor-wise overall is going to be the overall benefit, but I do think that it's going to take some time for, you know, each of these particular, I wouldn't even call them edge cases, just each instance of how something could be used to be really addressed properly and make sure that it's well accommodated. Thank you for bringing that up, though. By the way, that'll be something that we can look at, and this might be an interesting way to highlight something that we've been. I think it'd be worth just having conversation, because this is more of a community conversation question than it is, I think, just sort of a one-way presentation sort of thing, which is, you know, as we have these sort of elements or things that people are looking for, we have things that are more like bugs, kind of like what you're highlighting. And I think those are always great to bring up either in this environment here, or of course, feel free to always send those in anytime using the support email address, which is websupport@cals.wisc.edu. I think there's another category of items as well, which is sometimes more along the lines of like a feature or feature request. And that would be something that we are looking at as well, of a better mechanism to offer that, a good way to send those in. So you could, I'd say for the meantime, if you have things that are also, I'd like it to do this, but it doesn't do this yet, I would say, just for the sake of simplicity, also send those in to the web support address for now. I think maybe down the road, we'll probably find something a little more formal for those, but that would also be worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely.
I would imagine, for example, also that bug you're encountering, I think we're going to be working at a set of fixes to go out this week. So I'm going to take a look and see if we can expedite that to be deployed as well, to make sure that's covered. All right, any other thoughts or questions?
Any other?
All right, I should actually look at the list of items we have to cover and make sure there's anything else that's on the list.
I think
you covered it really well, Mark. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add. Otherwise, we'll jump into forms real quick.
Yeah, let me stop sharing here.
Great. Okay. I'm going to share mine, and hopefully this will work okay. I have some things we're working towards as well. So let's see here. Share screen. I tried to blow up the UI a little bit here to make it a little more visible, but I'm just going to work on this in the test space here. For those, I don't know that everyone here has had a chance to try this or not, but one of the things that you may or may not be familiar with is that forms should be a natural part of something that you can do on your site already. Most people, I think there's plenty of people in the room here who have discovered these and use these already, but there's quite a bit more that may not have. In the general usage we've seen for Gravity forms, and not everyone has a need for a form, but if you do, this is something to really take a look at. I think we've seen maybe around 25% or so actually utilizing a form within their site. So in cases like this, Gravity Forms is basically a little option you can have on your left-hand side. And I just want to kind of cover some quick basics of it just for folks that are not already familiar. Encourage us to use them. Keep in mind that forms is one of those things where there's already a couple of solutions on campus. So I'm not going to say this is the only way to do a form. You certainly can take advantage of doing something with Qualtrics, which is always a great way to do things. There, I know some folks also will often utilize something like Google Forms. So I think the pros and cons of any of those particular platforms vary. I think depending on what they excel at, some of the reporting you might get out of them, for example, can be different. But Gravity Forms is pretty full featured and definitely something that's worth taking a look at if you're looking at having some sort of form on your site. So first and foremost, I mean, I think the most common things I'll do a couple of quick examples and show you some of the options, and then we'll just sort of leave it open for maybe some questions if there are any at all. So for those that have not used Gravity Forms before, again, you should see a forms option. This is activated network-wide, so everyone on the platform should have this available. But if you have a form, if you're looking to create a form, you can do so kind of off on the left-hand side. And once you're looking at the Gravity Forms, sort of section, if you will, you can craft any sort of new form. I'm going to make one called test form. If I could spell, that'd be fantastic. And once you jump in here, it's thankfully, I think, a really, relatively simple mechanism for making forms. I think it's grown at least over the years. I know earlier versions it used to be a little more confusing than not, but there's a lot of really interesting things we can do with it. So right off the bat, you're going to see that you kind of get this empty space, but you can start to add any kind of fields you might want to have. And I always recommend taking a good look through this list of forms here on the right-hand side just before you get started, because it can save you a whole lot of extra time and effort. For example, if you wanted to collect someone's name, you could obviously make an empty single-line text field and then go click on it, which gives you the way to edit it, and then make it say name. You can decide a number of options below it and whether or not it's required or not. But the other way to do that is if you look under this same list under the add field section, you're going to find that under advanced fields, there's actually one for name already. And it kind of just quickly simplifies a little bit of the formatting for you. So if you wanted to collect name, it gives you sort of a preset list of options for just getting name, whether you need to care about prefix or middle or suffix, that sort of thing. So definitely worthwhile to take a little look at as you're doing that. And that is true of a number of different advanced fields you might find to be pretty common, such as getting someone's email address, making sure there's validation around that email address, rather than just sort of putting a single line of text in and hoping that the email address is entered correctly. So each time you utilize something like Gravity Forms, there's some options you may find yourself going back and forth on. Within the editor itself, it does resemble quite a bit of what Gutenberg is doing now, and I think that there's definitely some shared similarities there. But effectively, it's a similar sort of drag drop interface, like I think many have used in the past. As you look through and add particular forms here, the only thing you're going to want to keep in mind is that as you're building any sort of form, you don't want to be trying to collect any sort of personal or private information. That's something that is not something we support. And there are other mechanisms to proceed for if you're going to try to do something like that. And there's better elements to proceed with. The main thing here, though, with any sort of form, especially like a general contact form or a request for more information form or things like that, is that you're going to want to keep in mind which fields you're just absolutely going to need the user to fill out if you plan to get back to them. If someone's asking for something and you need a way to contact them back, you're certainly going to need to go into looking at something like email and mark it as required. I see we have a chat message here. I wanted to double check I'm not missing something. Oh, where in Gravity Forms do we indicate who will receive the form once it is submitted? Oh, that's great. I'll jump into that in just a moment here. So let's say I have a couple of form elements like this. I'll add one more just for the sake of this example. Let's just add a general paragraph of text to say, this is where someone could add, questions. So in this case, let's say I'm going to save what I'm working on so far. What I've got here, though, doesn't necessarily pertain to all the things you might want to do with the form, right? So then that question you're looking for, like, how do you tell what someone's going to see when they fill it out, who's going to get an email to be notified, all sorts of things. So right up in the top, there's a section for settings. And if you go under form settings, you're going to see under here some of the default form settings that are general, such as just, again, things you filled out sort of right off from the beginning with the title. You can do a few extra things as well with some field indicators and just even enabling if you have a really long form, which again, I wouldn't recommend to make a form too long, but if you need to, there's even an option for save and continue, which I think is one of those things where this is the kind of thing where I'd have to test this to be sure, because I think that the previous incarnations it's used a cookie, but I don't know that actually is operating correctly. So I'm going to double check on that and get back to everybody. I want to make sure that actually works as I expect. That may not. But the main thing that you probably care about much more is the confirmations and notifications. Now, these two labels are a little bit confusing, I think, at least from my own standpoint. Confirmation is just simply the message that the user gets once they hit submit. And they, by default, get it basically in line. So when they click submit, it doesn't take them off to a page by default. It just replaces the form with a message. And it's a very generic message. If you click on it and click edit, you can change what that message is. And it just says, thank you for contacting us. We'll be with you shortly. You can change this to be whatever you'd like it to be. But you can also change this to send this off to a page, for example. If you want someone to go off to a page that's got a lot more information to it that you've already crafted, you can redirect them to that place, right? Or to another URL entirely. Again, with a redirect entirely, you're probably gonna have a very specific use case. I think it'd be very odd if I filled out a form to suddenly go from a CALS website off to Google, right? So keep that in mind. You're gonna wanna make sure the experience feels natural to the user, so it doesn't create any suspicion or uneasy feelings about where your data is going. The main thing with this is that your notifications is the second portion of this. So your notifications are going to be the actual emails that go out. And that would be something that by default, it always starts off with sending just a notification to whoever's marked as the site admin. So if you are your site owner, that's where it would go. However, you can change this and just you put in a comma separated list of multiple email addresses to receive a notification. And also by default, it's going to include all of the fields. So if I scroll down here, it's going to be all of the fields that basically would have been included within your form. So if you had a name, email, and questions box, that's what you're going to get back here. You can specifically go in here and decide to pull specific fields. So if you would like to have maybe the admins get a full notification of what happened, but you would like to also email another individual who's with your team, but only really tell them the one field they really need to know about, you could do that. So you could say this is, we'll call this secondary notification. I'm going to say enter this email, send 2 emails required, of course. So I'm going to say this is person at WIS.edu in this case. And if you do a from name, you can do that. From email, by the way, this is something that we override no matter what you do. So it's marked as admin email. Believe it or not, it's actually going to come specifically from the from email address we've set with the network, which is how we make sure that we can do a better job of making sure that all emails actually get sent and make sure they make it out. Email sending is still an interesting and more complicated craft than it would seem, especially when you're doing some things programmatically. But that is something why when you send these out, they will still come from a no reply at wisweb.wis.edu. We are working with a couple other options for doing approved email addresses though. So if you have a very special use case where you're like, this needs to come from at least something at CALS.edu, that is something we can do. You just need to get in contact with us and we can help get that set up. The other things you want to do down here is, as you felt this notification area would be a subject as well. Notification of form submission. And then of course you can say which fields. And of course those could either be all again, or you could say that no, they just need the email address or what have you. And this can include any other text around it. Hi, here is the email. That could be the notification that goes out. And that's basically all that you need to do. There are other people who will choose to do notifications as well, because by default, the user who fills it out doesn't get a confirmation email. They just get the confirmation message. So you may decide, I want to send them a notification as well. So you could say notification to the user instead. And if you do that, you can say, who's it sending to? And we can do select a field. It's going to send to the email field. So as long as I made the email field required, I can do this. If I didn't make the email field required, this wouldn't work. So this is something where you can get into actually applying those sort of extra elements and say, thank you for contacting us, whatever you'd like to have with your message. So your actual session like this would be something with notifications, confirmations you can do. There is a lot more you can start to get into with some of these settings, and we can get into probably a more advanced versions as we move on. One of the things that, and thanks for the message too. I was going to say one of the things too that I would love to note or highlight as well is that, and I touched on this very briefly, which is where does the data go? So by default, these notifications get sent out right now. The default when you make a brand new form is to you, the site admin, or to anyone else you might craft and set this up to. But the entries also get logged to the database of the site. So when you go in here and you would have a form that got filled out, they would show up under these list of entries. Now, this is particularly useful, I think, for a couple of reasons. One of which is that you're going to always have those occasions where email is not always perfect. You're going to have folks that either had an email that didn't get they didn't make their inbox because it somehow got flagged by their particular email provider as spam. As long as you're sending to another WISC address, chances of that happening are a lot less. But again, depending on the content of your message, that can also do it as well. If you make the content of your message, hey, I can't wait to send you this free brochure, yada, 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 that sounds pretty spammy, that could easily happen, right? So these are the kind of things where you're going to want to keep that in mind. The idea though is that anything that gets filled out, regardless of whether the email makes it to them or not, is going or gets sent out, is going to be saved here. So the good news is that you can always go back to double check, and you can actually export all these items. So any items you have in this group, you can export based on fields to a CSV, evaluate them, look through the data, try to figure out who's been submitted. So in terms of reporting, the options kind of open up a little bit. You can do quite a bit. So I think that that's really, really important to take a look at. As you look at doing anything with Gravity Forms, there's a number of things you can start to get into with a form, and those get to be really interesting and fun. I think that, I don't want to, if people have questions and would like to see those, I'd be happy to show those. I'll just give, one little, advanced options. You can do things with conditional logic, which I think is kind of nice. So you could have somebody, as they're filling out a form, maybe fill out a drop-down field, and that drop-down field would give them a number of choices. And then based on the choice they made, they'd get an additional field, right? Or 2 additional fields or whatever you might need. So you could start to tailor one form to handle multiple purposes if you'd like. That's something that you could consider doing as well. So I think that's a really worthwhile tool for that. And the nice thing is, because of the way these forms work, and because they're actually not being loaded via an embed or an iframe, which is what happens when you load something, let's say like Google Forms, they are actually part of the site's content. So they're right in line with your content and wherever you'd like to place them. So here's an example, for example, of a form I did earlier, which is just your name, email, and questions as well. And it's pretty basic here, but it's nicely integrated and just feels like it's part of the site. And it scales well depending on whether or not I move this down to a mobile size or not, right? So that actually works really, really well. And I think the nice thing is that as you work on something like this, you don't have to have also even by itself. Adding a form to your page is pretty much as straightforward, especially in the Gutenberg version, I would say in particular, as just adding another block. So in this case, I have this contact form here, but let's say instead I decided I really wanted to have, something with that 2-column area again. I could do something where I have text maybe on the left and the form on the right, assuming my form will fit properly, right? So I could have something where I have sample copy here, and then on the right-hand side is the Gravity form. And I can just say, it's this contact us form. And there we go. And that would, I could show something like this. Now you start to see that if you do this, it might get a little bit squished, so you have to keep that in mind. But this is something you could certainly do. Right.
Now we had a good question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
We had a good question from Julie about notifications.
Oh, sure.
She just said, so yeah, if we have more than one person as a site admin, will both of us receive the form?
No, by default. So if you look at if you were a site admin and you looked at your site and you went under settings and went to general, one thing that I think one downside to WordPress is that at the end of the day, it still considers one person the sort of overall admin, even though you have the same level of permissions. This is just simply denoting who's going to get some of these default admin email notifications. It doesn't grant this person any more role permissions over what you have maybe, but whoever's in this field is who's going to get that particular set of emails. If you happen to have something here, and keep in mind, if you want to change this, there's a process that's built right in to do it. If you change the email address right here and hit save, it's going to first send an email off to the person who was the admin and make sure they approve of the change. If for whatever reason you're in a situation where the admin is no longer with UW and you don't have a way of them looking at this email and then granting you the admin email, let us know at web support at CALS. We can make this change manually for you and override that if necessary. But that's a good way to do as well. However, this is why for a lot of those notifications, if you do have 2 or 3 or 4 admins, maybe that might be a good case to switch out that notification area from being, just the admin email sort of field to something that is specific, has those, 3 or 4 people entered in there. So if I were to do that here and I went to notifications, and I change this admin notification as opposed to going off to this maybe sent to me, I could make this, Mark. I could do another comma. I could add me to it. I could add, Stefan. This is the sort of thing, and then that way, all 3 of us would get the email each time, and we just see each other on the send to, right? You could do this as a BCC, just like you would any other email, in case you just didn't want to have that broadcast as well. But usually, if all of us are admins role, then But yeah, no, that's a great question. Any other questions, or let's see, let's do check chat here. Oh, yes. And soil science, but yes, one of the email forms. I will say that too, that one of the things we'll often do is we're setting up sites. And we do this because we really value, and I know this sounds silly, but I value not spamming people with emails. So a lot of times when we're setting up new sites, especially for folks that haven't launched a site yet, WordPress sends out a whole series of different notifications. Oftentimes, especially as the site's getting first developed. And so if we're the ones putting some of the things together before we hand it over to you to start working on, we will often set one of us as a site admin to just get things started. Then, WordPress can then spam us with all the messages that are going to no longer be relevant by the time you start taking over the site. And it keeps you from getting messages that are either confusing or just fill up your inbox and add to the clutter. So oftentimes that's where we'll start with things. And then what we'll try to make sure we do is start to switch over those site admin email addresses to folks as, that take over the site. So. All right, I think any other questions? Otherwise, it probably covers that. I think we're probably, is that all for topics, I think, today, Mark? I was gonna double check here.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
There's just a slide here for folks. Again, this will all be in the follow-up with the recording and the slides, so you can get to links, but yep. Just some links on the Gravity Forms resources. And their vendor documentation is really good. So that's mostly what.
That's true, yeah.
What we link to and WhiskWeb links to. Although WhiskWeb, as Al mentioned, they've got some good notes about being careful with collecting any sensitive data and help. They have a link to the UW sensitive restricted data policy to help you figure
Absolutely.
out, okay, what is sensitive data, what's considered sensitive restricted data, and how to kind of think through that. But definitely, if you ever have questions, just email us. We can help you kind of think through what you're wanting to do in terms of collecting some information. Absolutely, yeah, a great resource for it. Yeah, WhiskWeb and CALS pays for this plugin so that it's just available for everybody. So it makes it a useful tool. But this is great too because they've produced some fantastic documentation. All right, excellent. I think here's an open question I have for the group here, and I know we're almost out of time. I think what I want to make sure too is that, I think Mark and I are going to have some more continued subjects to cover things in the next meetings, especially as we develop a lot more of the new CALS version 4 theme that'll be available to folks very soon, as well as updates to the editor. And I definitely want to make sure we address some of those bugs, notable for that wide and full screen views. Thank you for bringing that up. The main thing is that as we move for some of these topics, it'd be great to get, if there's additional thoughts for folks about topics they'd like to hear more about. And I think that's something that maybe that'll be a poll we'll want to put out, Mark, at some point here in the next newsletter, and just figure out what things people are really looking for to see more of. We want to make sure that these are useful and relevant to folks and work well in terms of helping to produce more of what you're doing. So with that, I will just stop talking and leave it open. See if anyone has any other questions or things they wanted to cover before they head off for their afternoon.
Hi, Alan, Mark, this is Julie. I was just wondering, I don't even know if this is something that is doable on your end, but in other situations where we've had data entry and computer interface, doing an open lab where as questions come up, we could, have you right there to answer them. Is that something that would ever be considered as a possible way to maybe help us as we're trying to troubleshoot things?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, having one of the things that has been, reflective of the time we currently had with COVID is starting these via remote, but I do think there's going to be some good opportunities for that. I know that I'm actually planning on being at the ARS, for just as one example, I think the meeting on the 7th, to go over some things, but that's less of a workshop lab, I guess, environment as much as it is more of just a general presentation situation in that regard. But no, I think that'd be a nice way to potentially do things. That's something that's is have some spaces where folks can come in and ask questions. I would actually, maybe it's a good question for you, Julie, too, is that I know that in the past, and I don't know that I should actually ask this of most of the WSQuip team. In the past, I know they've occasionally done similar things too, where they'll have had like, an hour or two of sort of open lab time, and they would offer folks to come in. And sometimes I've participated there just in case CALS folks came to that and had some more questions. So, but I don't know if that's, that might be going off too much off into other topics in terms of, folks that are not necessarily using WSQuip, but using the CALS particular platform in that case. So, yeah, I think that's something to think about for sure. I think we'd have to figure out a good space for that and then see when we can do something like that.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I think, more the fact that we get to do a little bit more moving around these days has been really nice, especially as the weather gets nicer. So. Excellent. Any other thoughts, questions for folks? Anyone? All right. I'm going to ask this off the bat because I don't know if I pronounced this correctly. I was going to say, is it Shaylin? How do you pronounce your name?
Yeah, Shaylin. But Shay's
Shaylin.
good. I'm the student like social media website, whatever, for community environmental sociology.
Okay, excellent. Okay, fantastic. Well, I was going to let you know that I will be in contact with you regarding the issue you saw as well, and we'll make a general. We have these general updates that go out now and then, but when you've noted a specific incident like that, where there was an issue with formatting, we can make sure when that update is out there.
For something like that in the future, because I feel like I have a lot of those like little problems that I've like improved the website, but it's just not. It's not as good as it could be, or it's not as good as like I see other websites are. Is there like an easy way to like contact about a quick question? Well,
I would still usually recommend web support address ticket is pretty quick. That's something that it just gets immediately emailed to both, an inbox that both Mark and I see. So it's kind of the same as emailing us. If you think it's really light and minor, you are welcome to, we're always on Microsoft Teams, which is a kind of the, I guess, not universal, but kind of common platform on campus at this point for doing chat. Sometimes if we get questions like that, sometimes that people think they're short, and then we'll kind of go, oh, yeah, no, that's going to take more time. We'll have to, roll that into maybe more of a ticket situation. But I'd say one of those two would be great. Every now and then, we work with some of the folks from different departments, and sometimes it's just worthwhile scheduling like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, just to sit one-on-one and talk about, hey, how do we accomplish this thing that you see you want to do? That'd be a good thing to do. And especially if you have examples of like, hey, I see this element over here, this, I don't know, group of tabs, or they're doing this thing with a modal window or whatever. I want to be able to do that. It may be something that's like, oh, that's a good example of where we could do a better job of providing instruction on that. And what we'll do is for now, for that particular use case, is take that opportunity to give you that specific detailed instruction, whether it be via video or document, and then probably add that to our overall documentation for everyone else to benefit from. And sometimes the alternative answer is, oh, that's the thing we don't have yet. We're gonna add that to our list of features to make, and as we develop things weekly. So
awesome. That web support address, is that just on like the CALS IT webpage?
it is on the CALS IT webpage. So if you go to it.cals, there's a button there to do that as well. And also I just added the address as well in the chat.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so I guess we're at time here, so I'll make sure
Yeah.
everyone needs to get on to other things. We don't take too much time, but feel free to send us any other messages, or if there's anyone else that really has another question they want to ask, we'll hang out for a few extra minutes. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.